welcome to Collapse Astrology. Welcome back if you've been here before. My name's Hummingbird, and today I just wanted to drop back in with some final thoughts about the election. I've had a lot of requests to do Jill Stein's chart, so I'm going to take a quick look at her chart just to, defy the two-party system. And we're also going to look at JD Vance's chart just because it's a really interesting chart, especially compared to Trump's. I'm not going to do Tim Waltz. Have not even looked at his. Sorry if there are any big fans of his out there that were looking for a chart read. But I'm going to take a look at those two charts first, and then I'm just going to give my kind of real talk breakdown about both the candidates, my energy read of both of them, and I will make a final prediction about what's going to happen at the election. And then at the end of the video, stick around because I do have the tinfoil hat and I will be putting it on my head and talking about some deeper down the rabbit hole conspiracy theories that I have. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Let me pull up Jill Stein here. So this is a noon chart. There's no good birthday for her. Similar to RFK Jr., I love a noon chart for her. I love the way this fits. So, I'm going to have this as the visual, and I might talk about it a little bit as if it's a noon chart, but, as usual, most of the things that I talk about will be applicable no matter what her birth time is. So I love this chart, whether or not it's a noon birth time. I love it. It tells me that she's legit. I'm sure she's not perfect, as no one is, but she is, I think, on purpose. She's not a phony, and she's not the leader of the Greens for any kind of nefarious, super egoic purpose. I don't know a ton about the Greens, and I did not do much research at all for this video because it all just takes too much time. But from what I do know, it's nuanced. There might be some aspects of the Greens as a party that people find fault with. From what I have heard, they are not so focused on local politics, and people say things like, maybe this was just AOC, but I think a lot of people say things like Jill Stein only pops out every 4 years. I heard an interview with her on American Exception podcast with Aaron Good. Generally, that's a lot of where I'm getting kind of my background knowledge. So highly recommend that podcast. From what I understand, especially from that interview, it takes a serious apparatus, like an operation in every state or almost every state, to be able to get on the ballot as a third-party candidate. If you're a third party and you want to be on the ballot in every state, for the most part, you have to employ a lot of people. You have to have people gathering signatures in every state. It's a big operation. That's why even RFK Jr., who had a lot of funding, like the billionaire funding of his vice president, they were paying as many people as they could to get signatures for him in a lot of different states. But I don't think, there were, I think maybe only a few states that it was going to look like he was even going to be able to be on the ballot there. And of course, that is on purpose. That is one of the ways that the two-party system functions, to keep people out of the presidential race who haven't been vetted by the political gatekeepers that exist in both of the parties as they climb the ranks. But the Greens have built that apparatus for themselves. They have enough membership that they can do that. It's not necessarily easy, but they have been able to get on the ballot, as far as I can tell, in most or all states in 2012, 2016, and now 2024. So the impression that I get is that the Green Party is an apparatus built to do one specific thing, get on the presidential ballot as a third party, and maybe not other things. Obviously, it's not going to be a party apparatus anywhere close to the Democrats or the Republicans, who have the resources and the massive operations to operate on federal and state and local levels and everywhere in between. So again, I could be getting some things wrong. I didn't do much research here. This is just the sporadic bits and pieces that I have heard about Jill Stein and the Green Party, so feel free to educate me in the comments if I'm getting anything really wrong here. I didn't do a ton of research on Jill herself, but I just want to name the energies that jump out at her chart, how I kind of read her personal character, which, of course, to be clear, is not the same thing as the Greens. I don't even know her specific relationship to it, but obviously the party could have issues that are just not her fault. So she has got in this noon chart, it's at the very top of the chart. It's Mercury conjunct the sun in Taurus. She's got an Aries moon. If it is this birth time, she has an Aries moon that's conjunct Kamala's, but if she's born later in the day, she could actually have a Taurus moon. Both would make sense. She's got strong Taurus energy and strong Aries energy, because no matter where the moon is, Venus and the North Node are both in Aries also. So she's got a lot of fire and warrior energy with the Aries, plus the groundedness and connection to the earth of Taurus. With this chart, she's a Virgo rising. In general, she also has a lot of Virgo. So Mars is in Virgo along with Juno and Saturn. That is more earth energy, even if it's not the Virgo rising. This gives you the sense of, the type of person that she probably is on a personal level. She probably has a lot of Virgo characteristics that show up, even if it isn't her big three. She's practical, she's a hard worker, she's a problem solver. She's probably a bit of a bitch sometimes too, especially with the Aries energy, although Virgo and Aries, I feel like they both can definitely employ bitchiness, but it's a very different flavor. Yeah, with Saturn also in Virgo, she is probably a very disciplined person. She probably has high expectations for herself and others. And, whether or not this is the right birth time, I definitely feel like this is a leader's chart, but not your typical political leader's chart, not a brash, egoic, charismatic leader's chart. More somebody with just like a lot of dedication and a lot of action taking ability, like Earth, the Pentacles, like the ability to like move things in the real world. But it's not your typical politician's chart in the way that it's not an energy that's like, except maybe Venus a little bit and the moon if the moon is in Aries, but it's not so much of an energy that's like screaming for everybody to look at it like Trump or even Kamala Harris too. So I read this as someone who's very driven, who's very principled, maybe rigid sometimes, like I said, maybe extremely high standards and an intense work ethic. I love that she has so many earth placements, since the Greens are supposedly an environmentally focused party, along with, the Aries fire warrior energy. And a little bit more about the Taurus in particular. So this is an energy that's very loyal, very dedicated, very in it for the long term, which she does seem to be, especially if it is in the 9th house. This is about a person's mission, the kind of why of their mission, and it's somebody who really stands on principle. And even if it's not in this placement, the sign of Taurus is associated with values and what we stand for, what we believe in. Yeah, also interesting, like Taurus is like I said, very dedicated, very loyal, and she is in this position of fighting these kind of losing battles deliberately. Now, this kind of energy can be stubborn, can be slow to change its mind, and I could see how combined with Virgo, there could be some inflexibility here, maybe in her leadership and her principles. I did hear from an insider who was one of her top campaign people, I think in 2016, but maybe 2012, maybe both. Some of her staff tried to get her to take a pro-Palestine, pro-BDS stance, and she wouldn't. She was afraid of the fake country lobby, or she wanted to fundraise from them or something, but she wouldn't bend on that, whatever that was at that time. And obviously now she has changed her mind, but anyway, that's just kind of a shadow, that inability to like make a quick pivot of, this type of energy, both the Taurus and the Virgo. And in her transits, or if I didn't pull her transit chart up here, but if we look at her chart aligned with the chart for election day, it's actually her nodal return, which is interesting. So that means it's a big karmic turning point for her, with a lot of timelines ending and beginning. And her natal Chiron is the same degree where Kamala and Trump both have their south nodes. So this Sagittarius Chiron, and this is where we have the moon conjunct Venus on election day. So this is a really, really important little area of the zodiac, and it is lighting her chart up as well as Trump and Harris. So that kind of seems a little direct, actually, that like her Chiron is impacting the election. Actually, I didn't really think about that until right now, but yeah, so that's a very interesting alignment. And yeah, that's it about her. Let's go over to Vance. Okay, so this chart just fascinates me. This birth time is a double A rating, so the highest level of accuracy rating. It means it came direct from a birth certificate or some kind of a public record. And this makes for a really wild chart because he's a Leo rising, and it puts all these other Leo placements in the 12th house. So you might notice right off, this is almost the same rising degree as Donald Trump. Or is it exactly the same? Trump is 28 or 29, I think, and his Mars is at 26 degrees of Leo. And so JD Vance is right there. That's also that same degree that right in this same area of the zodiac is where the rising sign of the Dixville Notch chart, the election chart, will always be like somewhere in that area. So very significant area of the zodiac, this late Leo for American politics. And there it is with JD Vance. And then in his 12th house, he's got Venus in Leo, Vesta, Nessus, Juno, and the Sun. And I don't have time to get all into the specifics here, but this is some narcissism, like a really kind of deep psychological complex, a Leonian complex laid out right here in the astrology. In the 12th house, it just feels kind of dangerous, like there's more to him than meets the eye, and it's very intense. So he also has almost the same North Node placement as Trump. So his North Node is also in Gemini, and in the 10th house, a little earlier in Gemini than Donald Trump. Has that Uranus Sun conjunction in Gemini in the 10th house, but that's a really interesting overlap. And then for JD Vance, his nodes align with an opposition between Chiron and Uranus. So first of all, I was just kind of taken aback by the overlaps between Vance and Trump, and like wondering like how could they function together. It feels like their egos would clash so intensely, but it's possible they never really spend any time around each other. It's possible that that would actually be not something that would work. And then, so JD Vance has this complicated 4th house. His childhood story is very public, or at least the version that he tells of it in Hillbilly Elegy. So he's, made these energies public, and you can see that actually what happened with Hillbilly Elegy in this Chiron-Uranus opposition aligned with the nodes. He did something very subversive in relationship to his 4th house, the space that he grew up in, by getting an elite education and then by writing about his experience growing up. He very much portrays himself in Hillbilly Elegy in a Chiron-like way. The wounded healer taking the wounds of Appalachian poverty and telling the stories publicly in a Gemini type of energy for the purpose of healing and integration. And these days, of course, that all seems like a joke, which is kind of a Chiron-esque energy also. There's a lot more I could say here. Obviously, the Gemini, just like with Trump, Harris also, and her ascendant, like it's an energy that will say anything. It's an energy that will talk out of its ass. And then there is this Mars in Scorpio right on the IC, as well as Saturn in Scorpio in his 3rd house. And I don't know what to make of this, but it looks ominous. I read part of Hillbilly Elegy. It was a long time ago, but even then I kind of was a little, I don't remember why I stopped reading, but it was leaving a bad enough taste in my mouth that I didn't finish it. So I don't remember what he says about his childhood, but this looks like some energy that could potentially be some kind of abuse, some kind of dark hidden secrets. Maybe in a third house, so not like in the home as much as in a third house space, but also maybe both. And also when I looked at this, I was immediately struck by the sense that I had so strongly when his wife spoke at the Republican National Convention. I just was like, that is a battered woman. And so I do think he probably has a real dark side that is, maybe doesn't come out in public. Maybe he puts a nice Taurus on the midheaven, like a solid impression out to the world, and his Leo ego leads the way, but he might have a real different shadow Mars and Scorpio energy that shows up in private situations. His transits right now and on election day, just like Trump, Uranus will be on his midheaven. Mercury will be in early Sagittarius on his south node, so I don't know what that might mean, but I noticed that. And other than that, there's not any like direct impacts for the election day or the inauguration. So I don't know, what that means there. If you look at his transits, he's come out of many years of Uranus at the top of his chart, squaring all of these 12th house planets, and then Uranus is going to square his ascendant in the next couple of years. It'll be fully past that square in 2026. So that's kind of a lot of, I don't know, maybe like red pilling. For some reason, that just makes me think of the techno-authoritarian backers that he has and the kind of radical fascist, techno-fascist philosophies that they embrace. So again, like I haven't done tons of research here. This is just kind of off the top of my head. But it looks like it looks like there's something that has been in formation for him psychologically for a while that hasn't like fully reared its head. And that will happen when Uranus leaves Taurus and completes a square to his ascendant and completes its transit over his midheaven. All right, so we'll finish here with the chart reads. So I've covered most of the details of the election astrology in my other videos, but of course things have been evolving and I have been observing, and I just have a little bit more to say. So here we are in the United States Pluto return, and what we really have is a complete breakdown of the executive function of the American soma. Pluto is related to the process of metamorphosis, the caterpillar turning into a butterfly, which includes a phase during which the cells all break down into a shapeless goo. And to me, that's about where the American electoral system is right now and the federal government in general. I'm not advocating for any candidate. I think we're fucked either way. I'm just calling balls and strikes, as my favorite podcast host Liz and Brace on TrueAnon like to say. I'm just going to call some things out the way that I see them. So let's start with Trump. What I see more than anything with him is the blind warrior. So I talked about this in my natal chart read of him. It's his 12th house Leo Mars. It is this fight that Trump has inside of him, this really intense, like competitive, you could say warrior-like drive, but he's really out of control in what he's fighting for. Personally, I don't think that Trump actually wants to be president, by which I mean he doesn't enjoy the actual job, the stresses, the schedule. He likes winning. He likes being admired by crowds. And he likes power, especially absolute power. But my read is that Trump was frustrated when he was president that he didn't actually have absolute power in that job. And that's why he did the Schedule F executive order towards the end of his term. He was leaning into how he might fill the civil service with loyalists. So there might be some part of him that is in reality that actually wants the thrill of reinstating that and carrying through with that dismantling of the administrative state. But in general, I just think that Trump is barely tethered in terms of his campaign and just the way he's driving his entire life. I think that he barely has any control over himself at all. I also think he's a little scared, which we'll get to in the tinfoil hat section. But mostly to me, it just seems like that blind Mars, that 12th house Leo Mars, has the wheel and the rest of Donald Trump is along for the ride. Also in his natal chart read, I talked about his second house Libra placements and how that relates to his vanity and his kind of cringe appearance. And the South Node has been transiting that area of his chart, and I feel like it's gotten worse. His makeup has been so bad lately, and I'll link a video where there's a previous makeup artist of Trump's that was saying how he just doesn't know when to stop with the orange color. And so I think that that is to the point where it's like a genuine dysmorphia that is getting more unhinged. That's the same thing that happens with plastic surgery or steroids. You see these people that kind of look like freaks by normal human standards, but they are looking in the mirror and seeing that they need bigger lips or bigger biceps or whatever. Of course, that's also the same psychology that happens with an ED. So yeah, I just really do think that he is losing it mentally. But unfortunately, it's also looking like he has a good chance of winning the election. Ultimately, the energy I feel regarding the election is that this is a very close race, and even in the quantum realm, it's not a done deal who wins. It really could go either way. And I've explained all of my astrological reasoning before, but basically just according to traditional interpretation, the election day chart looks good for Trump and bad for Harris. But it was fascinating to see Harris pull forward after Biden dropped out, to see Trump grappling for the edge that he quickly lost, not knowing how to handle her on the debate stage. And for a while, I was following that energy. I was feeling the tide rising, and I was just like, okay, Kamala Harris might do it. Also, that Saturnian energy that is challenging for most people, but that is at the top of her chart and that represents the cop vibes that she's leaning into. So I started to see that possibility was there. And like I said, I don't think anything is set in stone, but I'm going to make a final prediction now that Kamala Harris wins the popular vote and Donald Trump wins the Electoral College. The moon and Venus in Sagittarius on Kamala's South Node, to me that looks like a lot of popular support, especially from women and just from people who really believe in her in general. Sagittarius can be about evangelism and zealotry. It can be even an unrealistic faith in something. So that does make me think of the people that believe that the Democratic Party is actually going to save democracy, or that our collapse into fascism is going to stop if Kamala wins. And then there is Saturn transiting her 10th house Chiron, which can be an authoritarian energy. It can be an energy of limitations, of a big, heavy structure overpowering personal will. So those two aspects together in her chart could really speak to the popular vote versus the Electoral College. And her Chiron, I broke down a lot in my natal chart read of her, so check that out to learn more. But if this is what happens, if Kamala does win the popular vote but lose the Electoral College, to me that Saturn transit to her Chiron really looks like her kind of being the sacrifice of the Democratic Party. They needed to get Biden out. The smoothest way to do that was just to anoint Kamala. But if she loses, that'll probably be it for her career, right? I don't think the Democrats are going to unite behind her. They would probably have a competitive primary in 2028, and they would probably end up choosing another white man. So that's just kind of where I'm landing with all of that. One other thing, I was looking into if there might be anything in the election day chart that would indicate a delay in the results. And I checked the charts from the election in 2020 and also the election in 2000, which were two different elections that were disputed, although in very different ways. And it was very interesting because in both of those examples, Mercury was retrograde up until election day, and it was stationing direct on election day in both 2020 and 2000. So in general, what comes to mind for indications of a delay are a Mercury retrograde or any kind of an inner planet retrograde, or a void of course moon. With a retrograde personal planet, you have some blind spots, you have some information that's missing, that's not available yet. And with a void of course moon, you have an energy that dissolves very easily. So we don't see any of those indications in this chart. We have a pretty strong energy coming from the moon conjunct Venus. We do have Neptune squaring the moon and Venus, so that is an energy that does kind of make things hazy, but I don't feel like that is something so immediate that it's likely to constitute a disputed election. So I do not foresee a situation where we don't have results after maybe a day or two, but I don't foresee a long extended battle for who's the winner. And yeah, I'm gonna go with predicting a solid Trump electoral win. So woof. And even if I'm wrong, our whole situation right now is still a woof. That's the basic stuff. For those of you who are ready to go a little deeper, let's put on the tinfoil hat. So if you haven't watched my part 2 election video, I would definitely watch that tinfoil hat section first before going into this for some background. Like I mentioned, I think that Donald Trump is scared. I think he knows that there is something off about the attempts on his life. For example, they just released the 911 tapes from that day in Butler, showing callers were being told, quote, law enforcement has the situation under control, up to 25 minutes before the guy actually took his shot. So people were calling 911, reporting him being on the roof. They were being told everything is under control. There was overwhelming negligence. From what I understand, it was very much on the part of the Secret Service. And in other DS events like RFK and JFK, that's where a big part of the security compromise was. So I think there could be a similar tradition of corruption at the highest levels in that particular institution, kind of like they're an arm of the DS. And I'll link an Intercept article that covers the release of the 911 audio. And it also mentions that there was police body cam footage showing local police blaming the SS for not securing the building that the shooter was on. So something is just real off there. And I think that Trump, for all his unhingedness, does know that. There was also some weird stuff with the second guy, and he also just seems like a patsy for various reasons, like an MK Ultra kind of vibe, if you know about Sirhan. So why does the DS not like Trump? It's not because of his policies. It's because Trump didn't come up through the system. So in the process of coming up through the political system, people get vetted by the DS. They get tested. There are things that come up. They might have to sign up on something that's an obvious cover-up. They might have to betray their constituency and tell a blatant lie about it. There are going to be ways over the course of their careers that they prove their loyalty. And so that by the time they're at the level of presidential nominee, they know who's boss. They know that the president is a figurehead and doesn't really have ultimate power when it comes to some things, especially around foreign policy and military spending. But Trump didn't have that vetting, and Trump, as the massive narcissist he is, wanted and expected that he'd have full power as president. He also swept into Washington with his whole family, this very blatant nepotism, just expecting to run the town. And the DS is composed of psychopathic narcissists also, whose own narcissistic identity is centered around the power that they exercise behind the scenes. So to ground that a little bit, there's the example of Allen Dulles and JFK. So Dulles was the CIA director before Kennedy came into office. Kennedy fired him partway through his term, and he's a key figure in understanding the behind-the-scenes conflicts that once you understand them, it's very obvious that There's a quote in The Devil's Chessboard, a book by David Talbot, which I highly recommend. It comes from a 1965 interview with Allen Dulles, 2 years after the assassination. And he said to the journalist, That little Kennedy, he thought he was a god. Now, today's DS is a different group of people, but with the same attitude. And my guess is they felt that same way about Trump. They felt that he was coming in like he was a god and not showing proper reverence to the powers that really run things behind the scenes. And I could imagine these people considering themselves to be carrying on a legacy of not accepting a president who doesn't respect their superiority, exercising that ultimate veto against him, just like they did with Kennedy. But at this point, I think Trump might know that, like, the danger is real. I think that might be why he is completely fawning over the fake country. Not that it goes against his ideology, but he's really going to public extremes to say how close he is to the fake country's prime minister. And I just think he knows that there's a link between the DS and the fake country, and he's trying to appeal to them in that way. My conspiracy theory is, first, that if Trump gets elected, he will be taken out by the DS before the inauguration. According to my tinfoil hat theory, the other two attempts were to normalize this idea of a lone nut, a crazy with a gun. They could also be just wanting to fuck with Trump because I think they might be that sadistic. But the idea would be to normalize that possibility. Then there is another post-election attempt that is successful, and then there's a coup. Or even if, Vance stepped up to being president, they could have clearly asserted who's boss. That was how it worked with LBJ, who was president after JFK. I don't think he was explicitly involved in the Kennedy unaliving, but he knew who did it. And he followed the direction that the anti-Kennedy faction wanted to go in, which was basically towards war in Vietnam, which Kennedy had been edging away from in the early 60s. I do think that Vance is also trying to earn DS approval. I don't think that his techno-authoritarian friends are quite the same as the people I'm thinking of who have built their whole careers in these dark tunnels of the government/military underworld. The techno-authoritarians like Peter Thiel could be another power threat to the DS, but I think that so far, big tech and the DS have basically amplified each other. They have had the same exploitative goals, and big tech hasn't wanted to control the DS. It's basically just given it more work to do as the security state. Harris also is trying to win DS approval. That's why she is super publicly celebrating a Dick Cheney endorsement. That's why some would argue that she is sacrificing her candidacy by not taking a ceasefire position. That's why she used the words most lethal in the world to describe where she'll take the US military. She is also on her knees, just like Trump, making it very clear that she's willing to be their bitch. So then there's the second part of the theory, which I gave astrological evidence for in the other video, and that is that RFK Jr. is tight with the DS and is the one doing the coup, and that he would somehow find a way to install himself as president by the time of the inauguration with the help of the DS. If Kamala Harris wins the election, I don't predict any unaliving, but there can be a bloodless coup when the military decides to abandon one leader for another. There could be some high-level military people that just say to Kamala, we're not on your side, we're appointing someone else president. We don't care what the law is because we're the enforcers and we're gonna enforce our decision. That does happen. And I don't know, if an incoming president was unalived during the lame duck period, even if there's a law that says that the vice president is next in line, I don't know if there is specifically, but even if there is that law, it would still be a very chaotic time when some kind of new leadership could be forced, or maybe RFK Jr. would wiggle himself into a vice presidential place if Vance became president in that situation. So again, check the other tinfoil hat video for all the astrological evidence behind my ideas that RFK Jr. could be involved with something that comes to fruition around the inauguration. Okay, that is enough conspiracy theorizing. I think that's about all that I wanted to say. I'll be back again soon because no matter who wins this election, there is a lot more wild astrology coming in, and I'm going to be here as much as I can to help y'all understand what's happening in terms of the stars and the planets as we keep living through these crazy times. If you missed it, you might want to check out my Pluto in Aquarius video, which the algorithm was not a fan of. And of course, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Collapse Astrology so you don't miss everything that's coming next. I will catch y'all next time.